So we are here with Terry Virts, the veteran of two space flights, 2 weeks aboard one space shuttle mission helping to build the International Space Station, and then 200 days aboard the space station involving 3 spacewalks, one stint as commander of the station, a trip you made by Soyuz, the Russian Soyuz rocket. So you're a veteran of two very different kind of spacecraft. The space shuttle, which is just a big bruiser of a machine, and sort of a sports car like the Soyuz. What do you think it would be like to fly the Crew Dragon?
Well, I think it's going to be a lot more like the Soyuz. It's roughly the same size. I noticed when I flew on the space shuttle, it was like a muscle car. It was rumbling and lots of noise, and it kind of slowly takes its time getting into space. It's similar to a Saturn V in terms of weight and thrust, whereas the Soyuz was bam, and you're just up and gone. Of course, it was a nuclear ICBM, a Soviet ICBM. So they didn't want those things to sit around and look pretty. They wanted them to get going quickly. Right. So the Falcon is going to be a lot more like the Soyuz.
All credit to them if this launch goes off as we hope it will. But they are several years behind schedule, and the U.S. has been 9 years now without the ability to get astronauts to space on our own spacecraft. We're used to thinking of going to low Earth orbit as fairly routine. Why has it taken so long? Why is it so hard to get spacecraft into orbit?
Well, the easy answer is space is hard and it takes time, and you have to, work on all the technical things. But the reality is, between John Glenn's or Alan Shepard's first flight and Neil and Buzz on the moon, that was 8.5 years. And people, there were no cell phones to help do email, and we didn't have any history. So we were quicker in the 60s than we are today. And this is SpaceX, which is probably one of the fastest rocket companies ever. I mean, they get stuff done quickly.
Right.
Part of the problem happened where Congress just underfunded the program, right. Which takes some of the air out of this is a privately funded thing, because it was really a government funded project. And right. When the government didn't fund it by the full amount, that really slowed it down. Part of it is, there are problems that happened, and there's been several, serious technical problems along the way. But when I was in space, the SpaceX cargo capsule showed up a couple of times and brought my underwear and food and supplies. And that program happened really, really quickly. It was basically, I think, 2008 when the cargo contract was really going. And by 2012, they were delivering stuff to the space station. So SpaceX has shown it can get stuff done much more quickly than the old government model. But it's still not a perfect system. And it's still taking us longer in the 2010s than it did in the 1960s.
There's another competitor in this race, of course, Boeing, and Boeing's spacecraft is its CST-100 Starliner, which also will be carrying astronauts to and from the International Space Station. Now, they had a bit of a setback on their last uncrewed mission. They weren't quite able to reach the International Space Station. What do you think about Boeing's chances for getting their own crews up there, and how quickly do you think they'll be able to be flying?
Well, I think Boeing is going to do this also. It's going to take them, they're many months away. This is not going to happen next month for Boeing. It's going to take some time before they do it. They had software problems. And when I was a test pilot, I mostly worked on software programs, and I would always tease the engineers, it's only software, guys. Come on, you should be able to get this done. And the reality is software is often the hardest, longest, most complicated, part of any aerospace program. But I'll ask you this question, Jeff. Do you want to check your MySpace account later on today? The reality is, MySpace was the first to market, right. But now everybody does Facebook, right? So just the fact that you're the first to market is sometimes good and sometimes it's irrelevant. So right. Boeing is definitely a player in this market, if you will. Mm-hmm. The ISS program is a pretty small market. It's only 1 or 2 launches a year for each company. It's really not a big program. So the real marketplace is going to be, if we ever get to a place where there's private space stations like the Bigelow space station, or
Right.
if we ever start legitimately manufacturing in space, then companies like SpaceX and Boeing, and maybe others eventually, Sierra Nevada or who knows,
Right.
then they'll be launching 4, 5, 10 capsules a year, and not just one a year, and then it becomes interesting. So the government is kind of seeding that market, but hopefully it will eventually grow into something bigger.
And if it grows into something bigger, if we do have private space stations in orbit being serviced by private spacecraft, will they be vacation? Will they be academic? Will they be industrial? Will they be all of the above?
I think the space station has a corner on the academic market. You know, it's a government subsidized thing. That's the place for universities or companies to do research. The space station is the place for science projects, but it's not a place for manufacturing. Right. So if we ever figure out how to do 3D printing of human organs, or make microelectronics and mass scale that you can make them better in weightlessness than you can on Earth, if any of those technologies actually hit, then that's going to have to go to the Bigelow or, you know, another private space. So that's one of the markets, is manufacturing. And I think the tourism is also a very interesting idea. There's several, you know, space tourist companies, if you will. Virgin and Blue Origin are probably going to fly tourists first, maybe this year, maybe next year, but those are just suborbital. They go up and come down 5 minutes later.
That's right.
To have orbital space tourism would be amazing, but that's going to require a place like the ISS that's not exactly set up for tourists. It's a government thing. So I think that would be a really interesting marketplace. Of course, it's going to be probably more expensive than a retired astronaut or a journalist would be able to afford.
Yeah, I have a feeling I'll just be looking at someone else's vacation photos.
They're family movies.
Exactly. Elon Musk is a character. I think even Musk himself would admit that he's a bit of a character. And there's been some friction between him and NASA Administrator Jim Bridenstine in the last year or so. Are you troubled by that, or do you just see it as sort of the rough and tumble of the space business?
I'm not troubled. I thought you were going to say there's been some friction between him and everyone.
A little of that.
This is the world that we live in. I'm a lot more troubled or excited by a rocket that works or doesn't work than I am about, you know, some tweets going off. Elon has admitted that he's the kind of the king of self-inflicted wounds. If I was a shareholder, I might want my CEO to you know, be more focused on shareholder value and not on, you know, Twitter. But that's between him and his shareholders. So the things that concern me as an astronaut, if I were flying, and I'm not, I'm retired, I don't work at NASA, I'm done. Is the rocket going to work? Is the escape engine going to work? Will the parachutes work? Will the rendezvous system work? Is the software are the computers going to work? All that's the stuff that really would concern me. And that's where I think having some transparency and making sure that you're just being open and honest with the public is more important. Some of this other stuff is just showmanship, I think.
Right. Now, before we went live here, you and I were talking a little bit about the difference between flying, say, a Soyuz and flying the new SpaceX Crew Dragon. And certainly no slur on Bob Behnken or Doug Hurley, the astronauts who will be aboard the Crew Dragon. But you said that there is a bit less flying going on with this spacecraft than there is when you're at the stick of a Soyuz or a space shuttle. Tell me a bit about that. How come?
Right. So actually, the details of it are proprietary, and I've never worked at SpaceX, or that wasn't my job back when I was at NASA. So I don't know all the details, but from what I understand, there's basically no flying involved. Everything is automated from the launch to on-orbit maneuvering. The docking is automated. During entry, there's nothing for the crew to do. The capsule does everything. There's not, from what I understand, there's not even like a control stick that you normally have to fly an airplane or a spaceship. They are going to do some manual maneuvering during docking. just to prove that the system works, because this is a test flight. So, but it's like it's a touchpad. So they're going to have a screen, and they'll be, roll left, and then the shuttle will roll left, and then pitch up, and the capsule will pitch up. Flying on the space shuttle, it was designed in the 70s. Right. It was the best flying machine of all time. It was, and you could fly it, during launch. I did fly it in orbit. I flew, rendezvous, and I flew around the space station with the control stick, and back in the atmosphere, I flew it with the control stick, and like an airplane. So the shuttle, from a test pilot's point of view, there will never be anything as cool as the space shuttle, because you could really fly the thing. But this is a new era. It's the 2020s. And, we're going to have self-driving cars. I think by the end of the century, our grandkids are going to think back and, hey, Grandpa, what was it like to have a car that you had to drive, This is just the way of things. The goal of this is not to fly it. The goal of this is to take people from Earth to the space station and back. It's just a logistical cog in the space station program. As you mentioned, we've been doing this since John Glenn and Yuri Gagarin in the early 60s. And this is just a more modern version of that. And this is not the goal. Like I said, we got to get people into space. The goal is what they do after they get to space. That's the interesting part of it. So this is kind of it's the rental car at the airport. It's not your vacation destination.
We're talking about 2024 to have boots on the moon, the first woman and the next man. Mm-hmm. In candor, are you sanguine about that? Do you think we can make that date?
Well, the Commercial Crew Program, if you will, was really born in 2009 when the Obama administration took over, and Charlie and Laurie Garver kind of ran the space agency. They announced Constellation was canceled the week I launched in space in 2010. And here it is, 2020. So that's a decade. Yeah. And we still haven't sent people just to Earth orbit in a capsule. Right. And we're going to be on the moon in 4 years. So I just, as a realistic person, that doesn't seem realistic at all. However, in the 60s, we did do that, right? We were able to make it happen. Yeah. But it's not the 1960s NASA today. So that's going to be something that's going to be very difficult. I think we also need to say, why are we doing that? And I think if it's part of a strategic plan to use the moon as a testing ground to get to Mars, if it were part of a truly strategic plan, then you do the things you need to do to, fulfill that strategic plan, rather than just say, here's a random thing and we have to do it. The other thing is the debt that we're racking up right now, Jeff, is staggering, and it's just changed the course of the next decade or two, what's happening in 2020. So we're going to have to be very strategic about money that we spend. Right. So I think there's just a new reality that we're in.
Right. And that brings us to the always somewhat touchy area of politics. For our viewers, you mentioned Constellation, which was, of course, the lunar exploration program that was established under the George W. Bush administration, and there was a fair amount of progress, a good amount of progress that was made on that. And then it was canceled under the Obama administration, and the Obama administration had a number of its own policies, including the asteroid redirect mission, moving an asteroid closer to Earth, and then in studying it. Now, under the Trump administration, we are back on the lunar course. Do you worry that whatever happens in November, the Trump administration will either end then or it will end in 4 years? That's not much time either way. Right. Do you worry that we will once again shift course and start all over and have a new program that will have to be begun from scratch?
Right. One of the things, while I was an astronaut, you fly and then you go visit Congress and the White House. I've been there several times. And now that I'm retired from being an astronaut, I've spoken at the National Space Council to the Vice President. And I talk to folks often. And the one message I always have for them is, it's not about the rocket science, it's about the political science. And unless the way to run a space program is not change what the last guy did because you don't like him. And that's what we've been doing now for more than a decade. So the political system's broken in so many ways. NASA is just 1% of a really messed up political system, right?
Right.
So I think the hope for me is that private companies can put together a plan. I think if we can figure out how to do private-public partnerships, right? And I know Mr. Breinstein's been really focused on that, and that I know this is a priority for him. But, you know, let Blue Origin, just let them go. Let SpaceX go. Let Sierra Nevada go. Let these other companies, and Boeing and Lockheed, they can do things privately, and when they are allowed to do that, they can be more efficient too. So I think if we can figure out how to let these companies do things, and let the government do things like make treaties, you know, bring in Russia, bring in Europe, bring in other countries to work. Eventually, we're going to need nuclear power. Government's going to have to do that. You know, SpaceX is not going to make a nuclear reactor. So I think if we figure out how to do that right, that can help us moderate, attenuate some of this political ups and downs that we have. Because otherwise, it's never going to happen. And the SLS, you know, that rocket really was born in 2005 when George W. gave his vision for space exploration.
Right.
It was going to use cheaper engines. It was going to be, they weren't going to have a capsule on it. It was going to just be the cargo ship. It was part of an integrated plan. Yeah. And then that got canceled and changed. And that was 15 years ago. And it's still years and years away from launching people. So.
Yeah, I remember at the time in 2005 when it was announced, the target date was footprints on the moon, and maybe as early as 2015. Well, that's 5 years ago. We're still not back in low Earth orbit.
I think Aerospace Magazine did an article. I was one of the next astronauts on the moon. I was one of the guys they featured, along with some of the, I think Megan Bankin and Karen Nyberg, actually.
Yeah.
Bob and Doug's wives, I think they were in there too.
Would you suit back up to go to the moon?
You know what? To go to the moon, yes, of course. I had this do I stay or leave calculus that I went through at NASA, and I had kind of done everything there was to do. I was a station commander and shuttle pilot and blah, blah, blah. So there was other things I want to do in life. But I always said if I could go make a film in space, that's something I would like to do.
Yeah, yeah. Well, now there's talk of that happening. There's talk of Tom Cruise shooting aboard the International Space Station. So. So maybe you can co-star with Tom Cruise. Well, is there anything else that I have neglected to ask you that you think our viewers would want to know about what the stakes are this week and what it feels like to be Bob Behnken and Doug Hurley climbing into this machine?
I can say that when I flew on both of my flights, it was really exciting. The very first time I suited up for my first flight, it ended up being canceled for weather, and we launched again the next day. And that first time it was like I was out of my element. I was nervous. I was in this big suit. Even though I practiced it, it really was kind of, okay, this is something different. But the second night I went out, I felt a lot more comfortable, and it was almost like I'd already done it, even though I hadn't. So the nerves were better that second time. Bob and Doug aren't going to have that because they've both flown, you know, they've flown several shuttle missions. It's been a decade since they've flown. Yeah. But I don't think that's going to be a problem. Also, on my first flight, my first 2 days were miserable. I had the worst headache of my life. I was taking ibuprofen, and it was on my third morning. I remember Steve Robinson said, "Hey, how are you feeling?" And I was like, "God, I feel like crap." And then literally a few minutes later, it was like a light switch, and all of a sudden I was fine. Yeah. And then I was fine the rest of the time. On my second flight, even though it was 4 or 5 years later, I felt fine. Like your body just needs a couple days to figure out what the heck just happened. Right. Your inner ear fluids and everything. Yeah. For some reason, your brain figures it out. And at least for my case, and I've heard others say the same thing, you know, I felt okay. And so my guess is that they're going to feel okay because this isn't their first space flight.
Right. You told me something once, speaking about spacewalking, about what it's like to step out into that void, and every one of your rational brain cells tells you that you cannot fall. You are in orbit. Physics is keeping you up there.
Right.
But look down and there's nothing below you but a planet 250
Right.
miles below you. Describe that experience a little bit.
So on my first spacewalk, when I went outside, it was nighttime on Earth, but the station was up in the sunlight.
Right.
So that actually helped, because when it's daytime on Earth, you see the Earth going by, and several of my colleagues had said, "Man, I got vertigo when I went outside." I didn't think I would, but I wasn't sure because it was my first time. So I went outside. The very first thing I did, there's a waist tether on the side. I pulled it off. I clipped it on a handrail, and I let go. So I was in outer space, floating above Earth, and I just looked down. I looked around. I went, "Okay, I'm fine." I just wanted to make my brain behave and make sure it was okay.
Yeah.
Personally, I don't like ledges. I hate standing on the edge of a building or something like that. I hate it. And so whenever I'm on a bridge or on a building, I always walk right over to the edge.
Yeah.
Just to force myself to do it, because I don't like it. It's almost like I'm just having to beat my brain into submission, and but I still feel, I'm like, ugh.
Yeah.
If I'm in a fighter jet flying upside down, I'm fine because I'm strapped in and it's okay. If I'm standing on a ledge, so that was it. That was my way to try and get my brain, like as you so well described it. Every rational brain cell knows you're okay, but it's the emotional brain cells that don't necessarily know that.
You've got a book coming out soon. Tell me a little bit about that.
I do. Well, we both do. But my next book is going to be called How to Astronaut. It's a collection of 51 short essays. The goal is to laugh and to say, wow. Those are the two things that I hope to get by it. I wrote it myself, no ghostwriters. And it's some basic stuff like, how do you learn how to be a doctor? How do you learn how to launch in a space shuttle? It's some crazy stuff like, what do you do if the engines don't light and you're stuck in orbit? Or what do you do with a dead body if your crewmate dies? Or are there aliens? And so it's some stuff that is expected, some stuff that's not expected. You can pick it up and read it. Any chapter, it doesn't have to go in order. It's just a collection of essays, and I think it's going to be pretty fun. It's a good beach read when you go to the beach this summer. Coming out September 15th, so they've started doing pre-sales now.
Terrific. Congratulations on that. And thank you very much for spending time with us, Terry Virts, veteran of 2 space flights and former commander of the ISS. Not bad.
Thanks, Jeff. Looking forward to this launch.
Thank you. So am I.